Liam, have you ever thought about being honest with yourself? My words echoed through the house as I set my coffee mug on the kitchen counter. I wasn't sure why I said it. Maybe it was a heaviness of the silence, or the faint feeling that something was off. My 23-year-old stepson, Liam, had been distant lately. Not unusual for someone his age, but it wasn't just that. There was a restlessness in him, a kind I recognized all too well. Liam moved into our home a year ago after finishing university in Vancouver. A mix of practicality and necessity brought him here. Rising rent costs, job uncertainty, and my wife, Margaret, wanting to keep him close. He wasn't my son by blood, but over time I had grown fond of him. His quick wit and his curious, open-hearted nature were disarming, though he had a guardedness about him, especially around me. Margaret, my wife of 5 years, was away on one of her frequent business trips. The house felt quieter than usual that evening. I had spent most of the day tinkering in the garage, trying to distract myself from a lingering sense of unease. It wasn't until I heard the water running upstairs for an unusually long time that I noticed something strange. I climbed the staircase slowly, unsure if I was intruding or just being overly curious. As I approached the bathroom door, the muffled sound of splashing and movement reached my ears. I hesitated. "Liam," I called out, my voice firm but not accusing. There was no response, just a faint sound of water continuing to cascade. Something compelled me to knock lightly. When there was still no answer, I tried the handle. To my surprise, the door was unlocked, and it gave way with a slight creak as I pushed it open. The sight inside froze me. Liam sat in the clawfoot tub, half submerged, his face a mix of surprise and embarrassment. His tan skin glistened with droplets of water, and his hand froze mid-motion. His wide, hazel eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I didn't hear you," he stammered, pulling a towel from the edge of the tub to cover himself. His voice cracked slightly, betraying his unease. I should have turned away, apologized, closed the door, but I didn't. My eyes lingered, not inappropriately, but long enough to notice the tension in his posture, the way his shoulders hunched protectively, as if he were carrying a weight far heavier than the situation warranted. "You've been in here a while," I said, finally breaking the silence. My voice was gentler this time. He sighed, leaning back in the tub, the towel still clutched to his chest. "I guess I lost track of time." Something about his tone told me there was more to it than that. His usual confidence was absent, replaced by a vulnerability I had never seen before. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, unsure how to proceed. "Is everything okay?" I asked. His laugh was hollow, almost bitter. "Sure, everything's fine." But it wasn't. His expression betrayed him. A flicker of frustration, a hint of sadness. It reminded me of how I had felt at his age, navigating my own confusing emotions and unspoken desires. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would make him feel less alone, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded toward the towel. "You don't have to hide, you know. Everyone deserves a little privacy, but you also don't have to be embarrassed." His cheeks flushed a deeper shade of red. "It's not that," he said quickly, then hesitated. "It's just, I don't know." The vulnerability in his voice hit me harder than I expected. Here was a young man, grappling with something he clearly couldn't articulate, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I felt an overwhelming need to help him. The sound of the water trickling into the drain filled the silence between us. Liam finally met my gaze, his expression softening. "Thanks, Ethan," he said, my name rolling off his tongue like an olive branch. I offered a small smile, stepping back toward the door. "Take your time, Liam, but if you ever need to talk." His nod was almost imperceptible, but it was there. As I closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much deeper conversation, one that neither of us was entirely ready for, but one that was becoming inevitable. "Why did you stay?" Liam's voice, quiet but firm, broke the silence as I passed by his room later that evening. I stopped mid-step, the words catching me off guard. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His hair was still damp from the bath, curling slightly at the edges. There was something raw in his expression, a mix of frustration and vulnerability that made it impossible to walk away. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my tone steady, though my chest tightened. He looked down, his fingers fiddling with the hem of his shirt. "In the bathroom. You stayed. You didn't just leave when you saw me." His words hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to confront something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I stepped closer, leaning against the hallway wall, trying to collect my thoughts. "I guess I was worried about you," I said finally. "You seemed off." Liam scoffed, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'm always off, Ethan. You've noticed that, haven't you?" There was again that edge of self-deprecation, the unspoken plea for someone to see past the walls he'd built around himself. "You don't have to be," I said softly. His eyes snapped to mine, searching for something, judgment, pity, maybe reassurance. I held his gaze, steady and unwavering. The air between us grew heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that neither of us seemed to fully understand. "You don't get it," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I've spent so long pretending I'm okay, pretending I know what I'm doing, who I'm supposed to be. And then you show up, acting like you care, like you see me, and it's confusing." The raw honesty in his words left me momentarily speechless. I took a deep breath, stepping into the room without fully thinking it through. "Liam, I do see you," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "And I care, more than you realize." He sat down heavily on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his hair. "Why, you're not even my real dad. You don't owe me anything." "It's not about owing you anything," I replied, taking a seat in the chair across from him. "It's about wanting to be here for you, wanting you to know you don't have to go through this alone." Liam let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of his own words was too much to bear. For a long moment he didn't say anything. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "It's hard," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Feeling like there's this part of me I can't show anyone, not even Mom." The vulnerability in his confession hit me like a punch to the gut. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "You don't have to hide from me, Liam. Whatever it is, I'm here." He looked up at me then, his hazel eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Do you ever feel like you're not enough? Like no matter what you do, you're always falling short?" I swallowed hard, the question cutting deeper than I expected. "All the time," I admitted, "but I've learned that it's okay to feel that way. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The corner of his mouth twitched, as if he were trying to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," I said, shaking my head. "But it's easier when you have someone you can trust. Someone who sees you for who you really are." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt like a shared understanding, a moment of connection that didn't need words. "Thanks, Ethan," Liam said finally, his voice steadier now. "For staying, for listening." I stood up, giving him a small smile. "Any time, Liam. I mean that." As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me once more. "Ethan," he said, and when I looked back, his expression was softer, almost hopeful. "Do you think it gets easier? Being honest with yourself?" I hesitated, considering my answer carefully. I think it does, I said at last. But it starts with moments like this. I left the room, my heart heavier, but my resolve stronger. Whatever Liam was facing, I knew this was only the beginning of a much longer journey. For both of us. You've been quiet, Margaret said, her voice cutting through the hum of the coffee machine. I looked up from the breakfast table, startled by her sudden observation. Margaret was rarely home long enough to notice these things, but today she seemed unusually attuned. Liam sat across from me, his eyes fixed on his plate, methodically slicing a piece of toast. Just tired, I replied, forcing a small smile. Margaret arched an eyebrow, but didn't press further. Her phone buzzed, saving me from what would undoubtedly have been a line of probing questions. She was out the door minutes later, leaving Liam and me in a silence that felt as fragile as glass. It had been days since our conversation in his room, and though nothing explicit had been said since, everything felt different. Liam avoided my gaze, his usual sarcasm replaced with a tentative politeness that felt unnatural. I, too, struggled to act normal, constantly replaying our exchange and the unspoken tension that followed. "You okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. He nodded but didn't look up. "Yeah, just thinking." The vagueness of his response mirrored my own state of mind. I wanted to give him space, but I also knew we couldn't leave things unresolved. That evening, after Margaret had gone to bed, I found Liam sitting on the back porch, staring out at the dark expanse of the yard. "Can I join you?" I asked. He shrugged but didn't say no. I took a seat beside him, the cool night air wrapping around us. "You've been quiet," I said, echoing Margaret's earlier words. He smirked faintly, a flicker of the old Liam. "Guess it runs in the family." I chuckled, though the levity didn't last. "Liam, about the other night," he stiffened, his fingers gripping the edge of the porch railing. "You don't have to." "I do," I interrupted gently, "because I don't want you to feel like you can't talk to me, or that I think any less of you." His shoulders relaxed slightly, though his gaze remained fixed on the shadows in the yard. "I just feel like I said too much, like I made things weird." "You didn't," I assured him. "If anything, I'm glad you opened up. It takes courage to be honest about how you're feeling, especially when it's something so personal." He exhaled a long, shaky breath. "It's just hard, being vulnerable. I don't even know who I am half the time, let alone how to explain it to someone else." I nodded, understanding all too well. Figuring yourself out doesn't happen overnight, and it's okay to feel lost sometimes. But you don't have to go through it alone. He turned to me then, his hazel eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thanks, Ethan, for everything. I mean it." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, the gesture as much for him as it was for me. "Any time, Liam. You're not alone in this, no matter what." For the first time in days, he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reminded me of how young and full of potential he was. As we sat there in companionable silence, I felt a sense of resolution begin to take shape. Whatever had sparked between us that night in the bathroom wasn't about crossing lines or indulging fleeting desires. It was about connection. Two people, each grappling with their own insecurities, finding solace in the simple act of being seen and understood. The next morning, Liam seemed lighter, more at ease. He joked with Margaret over breakfast, his usual charisma shining through once more. As I watched him, I felt a quiet sense of relief. Maybe our conversation had been the start of something, healing, growth, or simply a stronger bond. This story isn't just about vulnerability or navigating confusing emotions. It's about the power of connection and the courage it takes to confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather hide. For the audience, This tale is a reminder that love and support often appear in unexpected places. Relationships, whether familial, romantic, or something in between, are complicated, messy, and beautiful. They challenge us to grow and push us to be better versions of ourselves. What do you take from Liam and Ethan's journey? Does it reflect something you faced, or does it challenge you to think differently about the relationships in your life? Share your thoughts and let the conversation continue.